She didn't even knock. That's the first thing I remember. 1 second I'm inside my kitchen making coffee, still half asleep. Next thing I hear this sharp smack against my front door, like someone just slapped the house itself. I open it up, and there's this woman standing there in oversized sunglasses, one of those luxury SUVs idling behind her like it's waiting for a valet. She doesn't say hello, doesn't introduce herself, nothing. Just turns around like she already finished whatever mission she came for. And that's when I noticed the envelope. Thick white envelope, stamped with bold red letters across the top, like some kind of legal warning label. So I step out onto the porch and call after her. Hey, you forgot something. She pauses halfway to the SUV, looks back over those sunglasses, and gives me this little smirk that immediately told me we were not about to be friends. No, she says, calm as anything. That's exactly where it belongs. Now I'm standing there thinking, all right, what kind of neighborly welcome package is this? I open the envelope right there on the porch and pull out the paper. First thing I see is a logo across the top. Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. And underneath that, in big red letters, final violation notice. Then my eyes drop down to the number. $350,000. $350,000 in fines. Now for a second I actually laughed, because I honestly thought it had to be a joke. I had moved into that house exactly 3 weeks earlier. The place sat on the edge of the neighborhood, big lot, gravel driveway, old wooden fence that looked like it had been there since the 90s. There was even a little barn structure behind the house, nothing fancy, just a weathered building that probably outlived half the people in that community. So I look up from the paper and say, slowly, $350,000. For what exactly? That's when she walks back toward me. Not fast, not slow, just this deliberate walk like a manager heading into a performance review she already knows she's going to fail you on. She pulls out a clipboard and starts reading like she's announcing parking tickets. Unapproved fencing. Flip of a page. Unauthorized outbuilding. Another page. Commercial vehicle parked on residential property. And then she taps the last line with her pen. Unauthorized land usage. Now I glance over at my truck sitting by the barn. Old blue pickup, dented tailgate, probably older than the neighborhood HOA itself. That truck had been through things with me. Long drives, bad years, a couple cross-country moves. But apparently in Willow Creek Estates, it was a crime against humanity. So I chuckle a little and say, my truck is parked in my own driveway, and that fence has probably been standing there longer than you've lived in this city. Her smile disappears instantly. You people always say that, she replies coldly. I pause for a second. You people? She ignores the question completely and flips another page on the clipboard. You were already warned, she says. I moved in 3 weeks ago. Not my problem. She points toward the road where the truck is parked. That vehicle alone is a violation. This is a premium neighborhood, not a storage yard. Now normally I'm a pretty calm guy. Years of working construction teaches you patience, teaches you when to let things slide. But something about the way she said that, the way she looked past me like the house itself offended her. Yeah, that was getting under my skin. Still, I kept it cool. I think you might have the wrong guy, I told her. She steps closer until she's practically on my porch. No, she says quietly. I know exactly who you are. Then she taps the envelope in my hand. And if that fine isn't paid within 10 days, the HOA will place a lien on this property and begin proceedings to remove you. Remove me from my own house. Right then the front door creaks open behind me, and my daughter Lily peeks her head out. She's 9 years old, hair still messy from sleep. Dad, who is she? The woman looks past me at Lily and sighs like she's already exhausted by our existence. I'm the president of the HOA, she says proudly. And trust me, I've removed people from this neighborhood before. Lily grabs the back of my shirt. I can feel her hand tighten there. The woman turns back toward her SUV and opens the door, but before she gets in, she points down the street. Oh, one more thing. I follow her finger. A tow truck will be here in about an hour for that ugly truck. My jaw tightens. That truck isn't going anywhere. She smiles again, the same smug smile from earlier. We'll see. Then she gets in the SUV and drives off like she just finished delivering a court order from God himself. Lily looks up at me, eyes wide. Dad, are we in trouble? I look back down at the paper in my hands. $350,000. 10 days. Threat of eviction. Tow truck on the way. Yeah, by most people's standards, that would qualify as a bad morning. but I slowly fold the notice and slip it back into the envelope. Kiddo, I say quietly, they just made a very big mistake. Because here's the funny thing about Willow Creek Estates. The woman who just threatened to remove me from the neighborhood had absolutely no idea who actually owned the land under every single house on that street. And that realization, well, that was going to make the next hour very interesting. Now, before the story keeps rolling, let me pause here for a second, because if you've never dealt with a homeowners association before, the whole situation might sound a little insane. But trust me, stuff like this happens more often than people realize. According to standard procedure, an HOA is basically a private governing body inside a neighborhood. When you buy a house in one of those communities, you're usually agreeing to a set of rules. Things like what color your house can be, what kind of fence you can build, where you park certain vehicles. The idea is supposed to be property value protection. Keep the neighborhood looking uniform, prevent people from turning their yard into a junkyard. In theory, that makes sense. But from a legal perspective, HOAs only have authority over members of the association, meaning the homeowners who signed the covenant agreements attached to the property titles. They can issue warnings, fines, and in extreme cases place liens on homes. But those powers depend entirely on the legal structure underneath the neighborhood. And here's where things get interesting. Because a lot of HOAs operate under the assumption that the land situation is simple, developer builds homes, sells them. HOA governs the community forever. But if something unusual happens, like a developer bankruptcy or a land rights auction, suddenly that neat little structure can get complicated real fast. There's also a psychological side to this kind of conflict. This is a psychological trap people in small positions of authority sometimes fall into. Give someone a clipboard, a rulebook, and the ability to find people. And before long, they stop thinking of themselves as neighbors and start thinking of themselves as gatekeepers. And that's exactly the mindset that HOA president walked onto my porch with that morning, completely confident she controlled the entire board. The only problem was she didn't actually know who owned the game. So after she drove off, Lily and I just stood there on the porch for a minute listening to the sound of that SUV fade down the street. The morning was quiet again, birds in the trees, gravel crunching under my boots as I stepped down into the driveway. Lily followed close behind me like she always does when something weird is going on. "Dad, can they really take our house?" she asked. I shook my head. Not even close. But I'll be honest, I wasn't smiling because I enjoyed conflict. I was smiling because the situation was so ridiculously backwards, it almost felt like watching someone argue with gravity. I unfolded the notice again and started reading through the list of violations. There were over 20 of them. Some were petty, some were just plain ridiculous. Fence not approved by HOA board. Outbuilding not registered with architectural committee. Commercial vehicle parked on residential property. And my personal favorite, unauthorized land usage. Lily leaned against the tailgate of my truck and squinted at the paper. "Dad, why are you smiling?" "Because whoever wrote this," I said, tapping the page, "didn't do their homework." And right about then we heard it, that deep diesel rumble coming from the road. Lily looked up immediately. "Is that them?" Sure enough, a big yellow tow truck rolled slowly around the corner and stopped at the end of my driveway. The driver climbed out holding his phone like he was double-checking directions. He walked over and gave me a polite nod. "You the owner of the blue pickup?" "Yeah." He scratched the back of his neck, already looking uncomfortable. "Look, man, I'm just doing a job. HOA called it in. Said the vehicle's violating community rules." I leaned against the truck and crossed my arms. "Did they now?" He nodded. "They said if it wasn't gone by noon, tow it." Lily stepped a little closer to me, and the driver noticed her right away. His voice softened. "Look, I can give you 5 minutes if you want to move it somewhere else." Now I was about to answer when another engine pulled up behind the tow truck. Black luxury SUV. And guess who stepped out? The HOA president walked toward us slowly, heels clicking against the pavement like she was walking a red carpet instead of a gravel road. "Well, look at that," she said with a bright smile. Perfect timing. She glanced at the tow driver and pointed straight at my truck. "That vehicle needs to be removed immediately." The driver looked between the two of us. "Ma'am, he says it's his truck." "It's not about the truck," she snapped. "It's about the rules." Then she turned back to me with that same smug expression. "You were warned." I sighed. "You really want to do this?" I asked. She folded her arms like she'd been waiting all morning for this moment. I enjoy it. Lily squeezed my hand. Dad, why is she so mean? The woman actually laughed. Because, sweetheart, she said sweetly, your father moved into a community he clearly can't afford. Yeah, that was the moment the patience meter hit empty. The tow driver looked uneasy now, like he could sense this whole thing was about to get messy. Ma'am, maybe we should just tow the truck, she interrupted sharply. The driver hesitated, but eventually walked back toward the tow truck. Chains clanked as he started hooking them under the frame of my pickup. The woman stood there watching with that satisfied little smile people get when they think they've already won. Then she leaned closer to me and said quietly, you have 10 days to pay that $350,000 fine. After that, this house becomes HOA property. I looked at her for a long second. Then I pulled my phone out of my pocket. She tilted her head. Oh, this should be good. Who are you calling? I smiled a little. The property manager. She burst out laughing. Loud, theatrical, the kind of laugh someone gives when they think they've caught you being stupid. That's adorable, she said. The HOA is the property manager. I shook my head slowly. No, I said calmly. You really aren't. Behind us, the tow truck engine started revving as the chains tightened around my pickup. The driver was getting ready to lift it. Right then my phone rang. I tapped the speaker button. A calm, older voice came through the line. Hello, sir. This is Daniel from the County Land Records Office. We finished verifying the documents you asked about. The HOA president rolled her eyes dramatically. I asked one simple question. Daniel, can you confirm who legally owns parcel 22C? There was a short pause. Then he replied, according to county records, that parcel is currently registered under your name. The woman snorted. Yeah, right. But Daniel wasn't finished. And sir, he continued, parcel 22C includes the entire Pine Hollow Estates subdivision. The tow truck driver slowly stopped the engine. Everything got very quiet. I looked straight at the HOA president. Which means, I said calmly, every house on this street, including yours, is sitting on land that belongs to me. For a moment, nobody said anything. The tow truck engine idled softly. Lily stared up at me like she was trying to process the math. The driver looked back and forth between us like he had just walked into the wrong movie scene. But the HOA president suddenly burst out laughing again. Oh, please, she said, waving her hand. You expect anyone to believe that? I didn't answer her. I was still listening to Daniel on the phone. Daniel, I said, can you confirm when the transfer was finalized? Yesterday afternoon, he replied. All documents were recorded with the county. You are now the legal owner of parcel 22C and the surrounding subdivision land. Lily blinked. Dad, what does that mean? Before I could answer, the woman stormed forward and grabbed the violation notice out of my hand. It means he's lying, she snapped. Then she turned to the tow driver. And you need to finish your job. The driver shifted awkwardly. Ma'am, maybe we should double-check. Tow the truck. He hesitated again. So I spoke quietly. Do you like your job? He nodded slowly. Then I'd stop touching my vehicle, I said. Because if what the county just confirmed is correct, you're currently trying to tow a truck off land that belongs to me. The chain suddenly sounded very loud. The driver immediately stepped back and started unhooking them. The woman's face turned bright red. You think this changes anything? She said angrily. This neighborhood has an HOA contract. Everyone here follows the rules. Interesting, I replied. I took the paper back from her hands and flipped to the last page. That contract only applies to homeowners, I said, not the landowner. She crossed her arms stubbornly. You're not the landowner. Lily tugged on my sleeve. Dad, are we? I looked down at her and smiled. Yeah, kiddo, we are. The woman shook her head. That's impossible. I shrugged. The developer went bankrupt 2 months ago, I explained. Bank auctioned off the remaining land rights. The tow driver blinked. You bought it? Yep. Lily's eyes widened. Wait, you bought the whole neighborhood? I scratched the back of my neck. Something like that. The HOA president immediately pulled out her phone. I'm calling the board, she snapped. They'll shut this nonsense down in 5 minutes. Go ahead, I said. She turned away and started talking rapidly into the phone. Meanwhile, the tow driver quietly finished removing the chains from my truck. Man, he muttered under his breath. I do not get paid enough for this. Lily giggled. But across the driveway, the woman's voice started getting louder. What do you mean you didn't know? She shouted into the phone. Slowly, very slowly, she turned back toward me. And now that smug confidence was gone. Confusion had taken its place. "You're bluffing," she said. I leaned against the truck again. "Am I?" She pointed at the notice. "You still owe $350,000 in HOA violations." I tapped the paper thoughtfully. "That's the funny part." She narrowed her eyes. "What?" I folded the notice and handed it back to her. "You fine me for unauthorized land use." "Yes." I nodded toward the street behind her, rows of perfectly manicured houses stretching down the block. "You might want to read your own rules again." She frowned. "Why?" I smiled. "Because if those rules apply to land violations." I paused. "Then technically every single house in this neighborhood is sitting on my property without my permission." The tow truck driver whispered under his breath. "Oh, that's bad." And the color slowly drained from the HOA president's face. Because in that moment, she realized something terrifying. The $350,000 fine she tried to give me. Now, before anyone starts imagining I turned into some cartoon villain collecting rent from an entire neighborhood, let me slow the story down a bit, because what happened after that moment is actually the most interesting part of the whole situation. The truth is, standing there in my driveway watching that woman realize the ground had just shifted under her feet, I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel like I had won. Mostly I felt something closer to relief. Because situations like that don't start with land auctions or legal documents. They start with assumptions. People see an old truck, a weathered barn, a guy who doesn't dress like he belongs in a gated subdivision, and their brain fills in the rest of the story for them. They assume you're broke. They assume you're temporary. They assume you don't understand the rules of their little system. And once someone makes those assumptions, they stop asking questions. That HOA president didn't knock on my door to introduce herself. She didn't ask about the property. She didn't check county records. She showed up with a violation notice and a tow truck, because in her mind the story was already written. Now, from a legal perspective, what happened next was actually pretty simple. After the phone calls, the HOA board requested a meeting, county records were reviewed, and everyone suddenly realized the situation was complicated. Because technically the homeowners owned their houses, but the underlying land rights were now tied to the parcel I had purchased through the bank auction. That doesn't mean I could just kick people out or start charging random fees. Real estate law doesn't work like a movie villain script. There are easements, long-term development agreements, zoning restrictions, and about 1,000 legal details that govern how land ownership interacts with established neighborhoods. But what it did change was the balance of power. Because the same HOA that tried to threaten me with fines suddenly realized they couldn't treat people like disposable tenants anymore. They had to negotiate. They had to cooperate. And that's where the psychology of this whole thing comes back into play. This is a psychological trap that shows up everywhere, not just in HOAs, but in offices, schools, even online communities. When people are given a small amount of authority, they sometimes stop seeing the humans around them and start seeing rule violations instead. The clipboard becomes more important than the conversation. The lesson here is actually pretty simple. Power without curiosity is dangerous. If that woman had knocked on the door that morning and said, "Hey, welcome to the neighborhood. I'm the HOA president. Can we talk about a few things?" the entire story would have gone differently. We probably would have laughed about the truck, figured out the paperwork together, maybe even shared a cup of coffee. Instead, she came in swinging. And sometimes when you swing first, you accidentally hit something a lot bigger than you expected. Now here's the part one always wonder about when I tell this story. What would you have done in that situation? If someone walked onto your property, threatened you with $350,000 in fines, and tried to tow your truck out of your own driveway, would you have handled it calmly? Or would things have gotten a lot louder, a lot faster? Because honestly, the real victory that morning wasn't the legal twist or the shocked look on her face. It was the fact that Lily was standing there watching the whole thing, and instead of seeing her dad lose his temper, she saw how staying calm can flip the entire board in your favor. And if there's one thing I've learned after dealing with property disputes, HOAs, banks, contractors, and about 100 different kinds of bureaucracy, it's this. The person who understands the rules usually has more power than the person who tries to enforce them blindly. But I'm curious what you think. Have you ever dealt with an HOA that went too far? Did you ever get one of those ridiculous violation letters about your fence, your lawn, or where you parked your car? Because the more stories I hear from people, the more I realize this kind of conflict isn't rare at all. It just doesn't usually end with someone accidentally threatening the guy who owns the land under the entire neighborhood. So tell me in the comments, was the HOA president completely out of line? Or was she just doing her job the way the system trained her to do it?